County 911.
Yes, I am a teacher at Columbine High School. There is a student here with a gun. He has shot out a window. I believe one student shot. I've been
Columbine High School.
I don't know what's in my shoulder. If it was just the last beat through it.
Okay, has anybody been injured, ma'am?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. And the school is in a panic. And I'm in the library. I've got students down under the table, kids. Heads under the table. Kids are screaming. Some of the teachers are, trying to take control. We need police here.
Okay, we're getting them there.
Police here.
Who is the student, ma'am?
I do not know who the student is.
Okay.
I saw a student outside. I was in hall there, but okay. I was on hall duty. I saw a gun. I said, "What's going on out there?" And he said, "Oh, it's probably just a different doctor." He told me a joke. I said, "Well, I don't think that's a good idea." And I went walking outside. I could hear the dance. See what was going on. He turned the gun straight at us and shot. And my God, the window went out. And the kid standing there with me. I think he got hit.
April 20th, 1999. Columbine, Colorado, just west of Denver. Columbine High School is attacked by two students, Eric Harris and Dylan Klebold. They murdered 12 students and one teacher in cold blood, 21 others injured, 10 of the 12 students executed in the library. Craig Scott, a student at the school, laid in fear and witnessed the massacre. Here's his story. I'm your host, Josh Diaz, joined by a very special guest today, Craig Scott. Craig is a former student at Columbine High School. He was in the library, is that right, when the shooting happened? Is that correct?
Yes, that's right.
He was in the library when it happened, where the majority of the killing took place. And I just want to start by saying thank you so much for coming on the show. I'm so excited to have you and to talk to you. It's very gracious of you to take some time to talk to me. I know that you're busy and you probably talk to a lot of people, and just wanted to say thank you.
Yeah, well, thank you for having me on, Josh.
Absolutely. So let's just start from the beginning. You were a sophomore, is that correct, at Columbine when this happened?
Yes. Yeah, I was 16, a sophomore.
16 years old, and obviously, I think what we just came up on the 21st anniversary was it just 2 days ago, 21 years ago. How vivid do you still remember it?
Any traumatic event that happens to someone, sometimes the memory is actually, you'd think that would be more memorable, but the memory is actually a little harder to remember and correctly and accurately, because you're kind of overloaded with emotion and stimulation. But I remember a lot, and I've recanted the story many times. And so there's still things that I don't totally remember very clearly. In fact, sometimes when I hear other survivor stories that were in the room where most of the shooting took place, I remember new things, and it's the same thing with them.
So let's start on the day of. You're getting ready for school. You and your sister rode to school together that day. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's right. She was a junior. She was 17, and we were on our way to school. And we got into a little argument. I'd been making us late to school, and got in an argument. I was calling her names. And when we pulled up to the school, I got out of the car, and I turned and looked at her, and I slammed the car door shut, having no idea that would be the last time that I would spend with her. The next time that I saw her, she was in a casket.
So you're driving to school with your sister. You have an argument. You guys go your separate ways. She heads to her class. You head to yours. And
then during my lunch period, I went up to the library. I had a test to study for, a biology test. And while I was in there, I heard these popping noises coming from outside the school. It was near the end of the school year, so I thought the teachers were playing a prank. Had brought the firecrackers to school, so I didn't make much of a noise. And then a teacher entered the room completely frantic. She was shooting. There were two students outside shooting other students, but she was so frantic I couldn't really understand what she was saying. And she ran over the phone to call the police. And while she was on the phone, she was yelling at all of us to hide and get underneath desks. And so I got underneath a desk table with two friends of mine, Matt Kechter and Isaiah Scholes. And we were just hearing these popping noises. And my two friends were kind of freaking out. And I felt like I heard an inner voice tell me to just be still. And so I became very still, and that's probably what saved my life. As the shooters came into the school, heading towards the lobby, and the popping noise was getting louder and louder, and that's when I realized that this wasn't a prank, that something serious was happening. And the library was the first room that they came into, immediately shooting out their guns. They were taunting or making fun of students before they shot or killed them. They came over to where I was. They saw my friend Isaiah. Isaiah was one of the very few black students, African-American students in my school. So the shooters were taunting Isaiah, calling him racial slurs, and Isaiah was backing up. And the last thing that Isaiah said was, "I want to see my mom." And then they shot and killed Isaiah, and they shot and killed my friend Matt and left me underneath that table. And I was just completely in shock and fear. I was paralyzed with fear. And I felt like I couldn't think or move. And the only thing that I knew to do was simply to pray. And I just asked God to take away my fear because it was just too much for me to handle. And in that moment, I felt God relieve me from the fear. And I felt like I heard him tell me to get out of there, get out of the library. And so I was the first student to stand up. I wasn't quite sure if the shooters were still in the room because my ears were ringing loud from the shotgun blast. In fact, I thought they were bleeding. But I stood up. I saw they were gone. I yelled at everyone, "Let's get out of here. I think they're gone." And I heard someone asking for help, and I turned around. There was a girl behind me rocking back and forth. Part of her shoulder was missing from a shotgun blast, and she was asking for help. So I helped to pick her up, and a group of us ran out of an emergency exit, and there was a police car a distance away in a field, and we all got behind that police car. And as soon as we got behind that car, the two shooters came back into the library, and I realized that we got out of there just in time, that more of us could have been killed if we had stayed in there longer. And then other police cars began to come by and pick up students and take them to a nearby street. And right before I left, someone tapped me on the shoulder and said, "I think there's a girl that's been shot over there." And I looked out from behind the police car, and I couldn't see who he was talking about. But I would later learn that it was my sister. My sister had been killed right outside the school library.
Your sister, from the way that I understand it, was the first person killed. Is that correct?
That's right.
And do you believe that she was targeted, or she was just in what you would say the wrong place at the wrong time? She was just open right there in the open.
She was just in the wrong place at the wrong time. They did know her, though. So once they came across her, at that point, they did target her. They knew her from class. They knew her as being a Christian. And so the last moments of her life, they were saying things like, "Where's your God now?" And the last moment of her life, Eric Harris, who was kind of the leader of the two, picked her up by her hair and said, "Do you still believe in God?" And she said, "I do." And he said, "Well, go be with him." And there was a lot of controversy over whether that happened or not, because it never made it into a police report. But the reason it didn't make it into a police report was because the boy that was with her that gave the account, Richard, who's now paralyzed for life, he went into a coma right after. And then but when he woke up, his mother and grandparents were with him. The first thing he said was, "Where's Rachel?" And then he told them about her last moments. And he actually then, after went back into a coma. And the next time he woke up, he couldn't remember anything for a long time. So his account never made it. That account never made it into a police report, but he told his parents, or his mother and his grandparents, and his mother told us. And the first account that somebody gives is usually the most accurate. And so that's what we know about the last moments of her life.
Richard was your sister's boyfriend. Is that correct?
No, she didn't have a boyfriend. He was just a friend.
Okay, they were good friends, and they were hanging out together when that happened.
Yeah, she actually got invited to go out that day to lunch. Some girls, kind of popular girls that I know, told me that they invited her, and it was a very cool thing that she did. I know she, like any kid in school, if you get a chance to hang out with the popular kids, usually take them up on that.
Sure.
But she decided to stay behind because I think she already told Richard that she was going to have lunch with him. And he was having a hard time. His parents were getting divorced. And so it was kind of a cool friend move for her to stay and not just ditch him to go out with these popular girls to the mall.
You know, I believe, and I could be mistaken here, but years ago I went to a place here locally called it's the local university, Humboldt State University. And I believe the person that was there was telling the story of your sister. She wrote a diary, and was that one of your parents? Did they do that?
It could have been. It could have been.
I think it was your father. I think.
Yeah, my dad and I both have done a lot of public speaking. We started a program called Rachel's Challenge, which is now the largest school assembly program, where we share her story and a challenge.
What's the website for that?
It's rachelschallenge.org.
Okay, Rachel.
But I broke off and started my own organization 3 years ago called valueup.org, and share my story and share my sister's story through that program, and really have a big impact on schools and school culture.
Let's talk about the two shooters, Eric Harris, Dylan Klebold. By all accounts, you know, Eric was the ringleader who was kind of dragging this other kid along with his grandiose psychotic ideas. Did you know the two?
No, I've learned a lot about them. I met them one time before, but I didn't know them. And
the theory was, as I say theory, and you know, I'm leaning on you because you were there. You know the people that know them. You've seen them. You've probably heard ad nauseum about these people. Were they bullied?
Yeah, they were bullied to a degree. They weren't terribly bullied. There were kids that I knew at school that were treated worse. Nothing to justify what they did. Bullying was kind of the big narrative that the media took on after Columbine. It's like, why Columbine happened? Oh, it was because of bullying. But even the psychologists that have looked into Columbine realize that that's a shallow answer, that's not really the deeper things going on with them. And when I speak, the biggest reason that I tell people that I think the shooters did what they did was that they focused on everything that was negative in this world and in themselves. They every day focused on a lot of negative stuff. You look at their journals and they're just constantly focusing on what's wrong with this world and what's wrong with other people and what's wrong with themselves. And they chose a lot of very negative, violent, angry media that they dwell on every day, over the internet, through movies, music, games. Never made them do what they were planning on doing, but it was a big influence in their life. And if you can just imagine, isolating yourselves because they really disconnected themselves, especially the last few months of their life, from other people, and just every day dwelling on very dark stuff in the media, the kind of impact that would have on someone. And then you take into account that they kind of blame the world for their problems and their emotions rather than taking responsibility for their own thought life. And then they also wanted to become infamous for this. They wanted to go down in history. This was how they were going to leave their mark on the world, was by doing this. And so they soaked up a lot of very violent media and played out fantasy of doing this. And it was like a fantasy that they, but I think that once when it actually happened and when they actually went through with it, it wasn't like what they fantasized. And I think that's why they ended up taking their own life much earlier on than they had planned.
Craig, when I hear you talk about these two, you're much more gracious and kind when you speak about them than most would be, definitely more than I would be for somebody who murdered my sister in cold blood. I'm sure that has taken you time to get to that point where you can discuss these things without look, I don't know what's inside your head, but it's been 21 years. Do you forgive them?
Yeah, I for a long time I had tremendous amount of anger towards them, and I wouldn't talk about them the same way. I used to actually fantasize, if I just had 5 minutes alone, how I would get my revenge. But that really started to affect the people in my life that I was close with in my family. And then I met a man, and I had a trip to South Africa. My sister wanted to go there on a mission trip, and the church asked if I wanted to go to her place. So my senior year, I went to South Africa over the summer and went into squatter camps, refugee camps for like a couple months, just serving the poor. And we had a bus driver, a man who one night I was up late, couldn't sleep, very angry, was thinking about the shooters. And I was walking around our campsite. I wasn't supposed to be out. And he came and saw me and saw that I was troubled and asked me what was going on. And I decided to tell him what I was dealing with and losing my friends and my sister and what I saw. And then he told me his story. And he told me about coming home one day to find his entire village in South Africa had been massacred by another tribe. And he lost 17 members of his family. And he came home to find all of his family had been killed. And this guy on my trip, he was our bus driver, and on the bus, he was always singing these beautiful Zulu songs and filled with so much joy and peace, a kind of person you wanted to be around. And then he when he told me this, I at first I didn't believe him. I was like, how could you be such a positive person and have lost everybody? And then he talked to me about forgiveness and the power of forgiveness. And he said that forgiveness is like setting a prisoner free and finding out that prisoner is you. And what I've learned about forgiveness is it's really for the person forgiving as much as it is for the person being forgiven. And it's really a letting go. It's not saying what somebody did is okay. It's letting go of your right to be angry and hate. And it also releases you from being a victim over and over, because some people go through terrible, traumatic things, and they get trapped in that trauma for years and years and years, and they replay it and re-traumatize themselves over and over, and they never fully heal. And I think forgiveness is a big part of healing from anything. And so it's something that I did, and it was a process for me. But when I was a senior in high school, I decided to forgive the two shooters, and that made all the difference in the world for me in my life, and made me be a person that people could be around without losing my temper, being volatile, becoming a victim.
Craig, but there are things in this world, Craig, in my opinion, that are unforgivable. Did you ever feel that way?
Well, again, I think that forgiving, are there things in this world that are never justified? Yes. Are there things in this world that are okay or right or good? There's no justification to what the shooters did. Forgiveness to me isn't saying that what someone did is okay, and I absolve them of any kind of consequence that might happen, that may have happened if they had survived. If they had lived, I think that they should be in jail the rest of their life. There's consequences, but forgiveness for me is a letting go. It's a letting go of the anger and the hate that builds up in me, and that's what forgiveness was for me, was a letting go of that. There's a difference between pardoning somebody and forgiveness. And I would never pardon what the shooters did, but I did forgive them. And for me, that was a very freeing thing. I was raised to believe that what is in a person's heart is very important, that there are issues of the heart. And so I'm not so much religious. Like I'm not, like at church every Sunday. But I'm not dogmatic, and I don't get into a ton of theology, but I am spiritual, and I believe in spiritual principles that Jesus taught, and that are existent in other faiths as well. And my faith does play a part into forgiveness. There's scripture that talks about the power of forgiveness, and so forgiveness is an issue. Not just for terrible things that happen, that you might forgive somebody as a way of letting go of anger and hatred. There is a forgiveness towards people that are still in your life that you're not wanting to, necessarily block out, that is for that other person, giving that person grace, giving that person mercy. And so that's a whole other issue. Other side of forgiveness is for people that are in your life regularly. And so forgiveness is just, I have 4 other siblings besides, or 3 other siblings besides my sister Rachel. I have 3 others, and, growing up in a family of 5 kids, we got in fights, and we were taught, to try to resolve it by the end of the day and practice forgiveness. And so it was part of my upbringing, and it definitely is a part of my healing process.
Let's go back to the library where most of the carnage happened. That's when you describe just very, loosely a lady on the phone or a teacher on the phone calling 911. That's a very infamous phone call.
I was in a panic, and I'm in the library. I've got students down under the table, kids. Heads under the table. Kids are screaming.
You could hear her on the phone, right? Calling 911. You were that close to her?
Yeah.
And when you listen to this, it by the way, it's haunting. It's haunting to listen to this.
There was a student here with a gun. He had shot out a window. I believe one student.
You guys to get your heads under the table. I remember that very, very vividly. Was she injured? Was she shot? Because they asked her if she had been shot, and she didn't know if she was or not. Did she get shot?
No, she didn't. Her name is Patty Nielsen, and she ended up hiding in the library for hours and hours. I got out with that group. She ended up staying in there, and that was pretty traumatic for her to be in there for that long and that kind of state of fear, and not knowing if the shooter was taken their lives shortly after we all escaped.
Do you have any contact with her ever?
No. I mean, I've seen her before. A lot of people over the years, we've had different kind of landmark anniversaries, like the 5-year, 10-year. A lot of people come together. A lot of people meet up at the school. and I've seen her here and there, and she's a wonderful person, but I don't have like regular contact with her.
I saw you on TV many years ago sitting next to Isaiah's father on a stage. I can't remember the show that it was.
Today Show.
The Today Show. And when he grabbed your hand as you were telling the story, it was incredible how strong that man was on that stage with you. You were a young man at the time. What kind of relationship did you have with Isaiah? Did you know him well? Were you guys? He was older than you. He was a senior, correct? He was getting ready to graduate. Did you spend much time with him? Did you know much about him?
Yeah, we were friends at school. Not super close, but we were buddies. He was very funny. He was extremely short, but he was really strong. In fact, he had a weight record for lifting weights at the school. But he was close to like a little bit like some inches taller than like midget status. He was very short, and we would pull a joke, kind of a prank. I'd put him on my shoulders, and in the classrooms they had a door, and then they had like a rectangle window that you could kind of see out of. So I would do kind of that walking down an elevator thing with him on my shoulders, like made him look tall, and then they wouldn't see me. But he was just a fun guy, and he had a great sense of humor, and he wanted to go into the music industry. He loved music, and he was going to be the first person from his family to graduate. He actually had a calendar on his fridge, and every day he would mark off the day with a red marker, and he would tell his mom, "One more day down, Mom." Yeah. And so that's why they buried him in his cap and gown with his diploma on top of him. Even though he didn't make it to the actual end of the year, they gave him his diploma and, said he graduated.
What a beautiful story.
Yeah.
You were under the table next to him, correct? Is that?
I was underneath the table right next to him. Yes.
And when the shooters came in, explain this to me. You were in the middle. People on either side of you both died, correct? Both were killed.
That's right.
And obviously in such close quarters, and I don't mean to be graphic, but there's blood and there's noise and there's screaming and crying and agony and fear. There's just it's hell on earth what you're going through at this time. Were you convinced that you were going to die?
I thought I was going to die. I thought that this was the end. And just overwhelming fear. And I just, when they came over to where I was, I just didn't draw any attention to myself and pretended to be dead. So I just laid still. Again, that voice that told me just to be still. I just became very still. I didn't move. I didn't look again. I didn't say anything. And I think that may have saved my life, just not drawing any attention to myself.
Did they kill Isaiah because he was black?
Yeah, they did. They happened to come across him like anyone else, but once they saw Isaiah, yeah, they targeted him out because of the color of his skin.
And I'm sure that, like you said, that there were racial slurs thrown at him, and they taunted him from all accounts. And you're an eyewitness to this. These two boys, Eric and Dylan, had a history of getting in trouble. They had their own website that I'm sure you're familiar with. that was reported to I believe it was the cops or maybe the FBI. Nothing was ever followed up on. Brooks Brown, who was a childhood friend of these two, was on the hit list of the website that they were on. If the cops, and I'm not trying to put blame anywhere, and I'm just asking, if the cops would have done their due diligence, Columbine would have never happened. Is that correct?
No, actually, I don't believe that. I think that, there's a lot of puzzle pieces that all this, when you afterwards put them together, you look back and you go, oh, but at the time, nobody thought of this type of thing happening. Nobody even imagined it. Yeah, they had a run-in with the police for threatening to kill Brooks Brown, who was their friend. But then, they made up. But these guys, and I actually was very close friends with Brooks's little brother. I've been over to Brooks's house many times. That's when I met the two shooters. And so these guys were into some violent stuff, including Brooks. And so, I think that, I think hindsight is 2020, and it's only after Columbine that we've, taken threats of shooting up a school or thought about school shootings, but it wasn't really in the psyche of anyone beforehand. So no, I don't hold any kind of blame for what happened except towards the shooters. Those are the only people I think that are responsible. Are there? Let me also say this: could it have been prevented if people had looked deeper? Yes, but that doesn't mean it's somebody's fault. And I don't think that, I think that they did do their job. It's not like somebody didn't do something when the police were called, action was taken. Nothing happened, it's not like nothing happened. But, these guys, the only criminal history that they had was breaking into a van where they were trying to steal some electronics.
Brooks
That's
Brown.
the only criminal history that they had.
Yeah, they were on probation. I remember reading about that because of breaking into a van, steal computers or something like that. Something pretty, like a misdemeanor or something. Nothing violent in nature. Now, Brooks Brown claims that when the shooters pull up to the school, he was outside smoking a cigarette, and that, I don't know if it was Eric, I believe it was Eric, said to him, go home, just go home. Okay.
Yeah.
And he said, I like you, we're cool, or something like that. Just go home. Now, Brooks, like you said, Brooks is a little more unpolished than maybe you are. Okay. I'm fascinated by the guy's story. I've never spoken with him, but I've watched many things on him. And, but these guys were friends. Was Brooks part of the Trenchcoat Mafia?
No, none of them were part of that group. They were mistakenly identified as being a part of this group that was in our school called the Trenchcoat Mafia. They were just a group of guys that were kind of into goth, that wore trench coats to school, and they wore goth makeup. And those guys actually probably got made fun of worse at our school than Eric and Dylan. They were friends with some of the guys in that group, but they were not a part of that group. They got confused with that group because that day they wore black trench coats when they were doing the shooting, and so people thought these were guys from the Trenchcoat Mafia.
The reason that they did that was to cover the guns and things like that, to suppress that they had these weapons on them, correct?
Yeah, that probably also, trying to kind of portray this dark hero type, part of their fantasy. But yeah, I mean, I think a big part is to conceal weapons.
There was a teacher that was murdered at Columbine. His name was Dave Sears. Am I correct?
Dave Sanders. Yeah.
Sanders. Sorry. Tell me a little bit about him. Did you know him? Did you have him as a teacher?
I did. I had him as a teacher my freshman year. He was a keyboarding instructor, and he was a real hero that day. He got his class out, and then he went back into the school, and he went into the cafeteria where a lot of kids were, most kids were, and there's 500 students in the cafeteria. He stood on top of the table. He yelled at everyone to run, told them the direction to run. Then he went up the stairs, and there's actual cafeteria footage of him. You see him going up the stairs towards the shooting. I think he went to try to evacuate more students out of the school. And that's when he got on top of the stairs, he turned a corner, and that's when he came across down at the other end of the long hallway, the shooters. He turned around to run, and they shot him in the back. And then he ended up stumbling into a science classroom where he bled to death for 3 hours, and actually had a friend who was holding the picture of his daughters and his wife in front of him at the day. But he was a real hero. He could have easily survived. He had already gotten out of the school quickly, but he went back and evacuated students out of the cafeteria, and then went up towards the shooting. So that took a lot of courage, and he was a real hero, and he probably saved a lot of lives.
Who was the boy? There's a documentary that I've watched before that I'm sure you've seen, because I think you're probably in it. It was called 0 Hour.
Yeah, I'm in that.
Yeah, and I forget the boy's name that was sitting with Mr. Sanders. He seemed like such a beautiful soul. What a nice boy, and for a child to be put in that situation is awful. And it seemed like he handled it like it was his job, almost the way that it was described. He later on said that he had no idea that he died when they took him out of there. Was the expectation of Mr. Sanders that he was going to survive?
I don't, I mean, the only people that knew about his condition at that time were the group of students that were with him. So I don't know if they thought that once the police came and that he would survive. I'm guessing that some of them did.
Yeah.
But he didn't. I mean, he didn't die in. I think that they came in, and maybe he was just at that time bleeding out, and I don't know when actually he was officially dead. If the police got him, if he was barely alive. But it was kind of just one of those situations where the police took too long to get in, and that's one of the things that law enforcement has changed because of Columbine. That they now go in to eliminate the threat. This was something that they had never dealt with before. There were rumors of a third shooter on top of the roof. There was booby trap bombs that they thought were set up. And so, they now know that when there's an active shooter, if you're law enforcement, your job is to eliminate that threat as quickly as possible.
Well, so here was from what I understand, the problem was they didn't even know who they were looking for, right?
Yeah, that's another problem.
There's
kids,
there's kids everywhere. So
right.
When you see these kids fleeing the school with their hands up, any one of them could have been the shooter. So I understand, that part of law enforcement. The other part I understand is, going into a school like that and engaging with armed people when there's civilian. Like, I don't know how much different they could do it even today in a situation like that. You don't know how many shooters, you don't know who the shooters are. You don't know if there's booby traps because, by the way, these guys did plant bombs in the school. I can't imagine there being, I mean, sure, you'd send maybe SWAT in and clear room by room, but I don't know how quickly you could still eliminate the threat of, an active shooter in school who, by the way, they're students, so you don't know who you're looking for. That was, to me, probably the biggest issue. Now, they sent nobody in, which, I agree would be different today. But to get to those guys probably still would have taken some time. I mean, that's just my opinion. I don't know that, for sure. I'm not a SWAT expert by any means, but, the other part that I wanted to mention to you or ask you about is their plan was to set off bombs in the cafeteria. So they had these homemade bombs that they made. They put them in the cafeteria. They never went off. Their plan was for those to go off and injure and kill as many as they could in the cafeteria. And then they were to stand outside the doors as people were rushing out and picking people off. Was that the plan?
Yeah, that was the original plan.
I sit there and think about this, and I'm torn here because what happened at that school was absolute carnage, and it was the biggest school shooting that we had ever, we'd seen one or two, kids shot at a school before that, very minor, I would say minor, but compared to what happened at Columbine. And when this happened, these boys intended on killing hundreds, if not thousands, of people.
Yeah, their goal was to kill as many as possible.
When this happened, if you look at it, this could have been even a tragedy of even more epic proportions. The people that lost their lives, you said 13 total, 21 injured, correct? They were trying to kill thousands of people, and I wouldn't say that they were incompetent, but they really they meant for much more destruction, and they meant for much more carnage. And I'm so glad that you were able to get out alive to share your story with me. I wanted to say from the bottom of my heart, I'm so sorry what happened to your sister and your friends that day. This might be your purpose is to teach forgiveness, because I feel like I've learned a little something about forgiveness as well.
Yeah, I think that there's a lot of lessons that I learned from the Columbine shooting. I started a program called Value Up, because the biggest thing that I learned from the shooting was just the value of human life. And so one of the big messages that I have in schools is that to students is that you are incredibly valuable, that you have an inherent value that's built within you. It's not based on what you look like or what other people say about you. It's always there. It's always present. And, I named my program Value Up because the mother of one of the shooters, Dylan Klebold's mom, Sue Klebold, she wrote a book, and she said that Dylan was valued, but he didn't value himself. And that's where the title of my program came up, Value Up. And what I've realized in speaking to students all across the country for the last 20 years, and speaking to over 1 million students, is that this issue of how a student sees himself is so important. How we see ourselves is so important. And if we believe in our intrinsic value and believe in ourselves, it affects what we allow into our life. It affects how we treat other people. And so I have kind of 3 main messages in my program. It's value yourself, value others, and choose influences that match those values. And I talk about other things. I talk about how to translate certain negative emotions into positive ones. I learned through counseling that you can take anger and turn it into determination, sadness into an appreciation for life, fear into courage. You actually don't know courage unless you're feeling fear. That's the time to show courage, and anxiety or nervousness into excitement. And then I talk about forgiveness, and I talk about emotional resiliency and not becoming a victim. That life is that happiness in life has a lot less to do with what happens to us and more about what we choose to do with it, and not being a victim. And so all these things I kind of come out through the telling of my story and the telling of my sister's story. And my sister left behind her own message, and that was a challenge to step out in compassion, to show kindness, and start a chain reaction of kindness. And so I share that as well.
Craig, I'll get you out of here with this. Like I said, I appreciate you taking the time to come and talk to me. It's fascinating. You're truly a good human being, and what has happened to you should have never happened to anybody. And when all the pandemic stuff is over, things like that, I'd like to set up maybe you coming out and speaking to a couple schools around here or something like that. We would take care of it, and I think your message needs to be heard by more young people, because the climate of hate and aggression towards other kids and just learning to forgive is an invaluable tool, and I think you have a lot to offer when it comes to that.
Oh, thank you, Josh, and thanks for having me on.
All right, so you take care. We'll be in touch, and I appreciate everything that you do and done. Thank you for coming on the show. And hit us again. It's valueup.org. Valueup.org.
Correct.
All right, valueup.org. Go check that out. Craig, thank you very much. I appreciate the time.
Thank you, Josh.
All right.
Die